Okay, let's get it straight from the get-go. All water is already salty. Salt appears in seas and oceans thanks to rivers, which bring minerals from land with them. Rivers are considered fresh themselves only because their levels of salinity are much lower. Movement doesn't allow salt to collect, and rains replenish them with fresh water. So, technically, what we drink is not exactly fresh. There's some salt in that water anyway. But if, for some reason, all the water in the world became much saltier, well, we'd be in big trouble. This is the Dead Sea. The level of salt here is much higher than in any other reservoir on the planet. There's so much of it that water would keep you afloat without any effort. But this curious effect is the only positive thing about it, because almost no life is possible in such conditions. Only the sturdiest of bacteria can survive here. There's no fish, no marine mammals, and no seabirds over the lake's surface. Needless to say, if there was this much salt in every water body in the world, complex life would have never appeared in the first place. Generally, though, the level of salinity in the ocean is about 10 times lower than that in the Dead Sea. That's cool enough for marine life, but land animals' bodies, including us humans, can't process even this amount of salt in the water. Chemically, salt consists of sodium and chlorine, and both these elements are part of our bodies. But they're in a very fine balance, and if there's too much or too little of either, we'll have health issues. For one, salt keeps the liquid from escaping the body. That's why, for example, you might not like your reflection in the mirror in the morning after eating too much salty food the night before. The salt naturally makes you thirsty. You drink more, and the sodium chloride already in your body doesn't let it out, so your face is all puffy. High levels of salt in your diet may lead to blood pressure increase, and that results in major health problems. 2. Just like I said, salt makes you thirsty, which is a signal from your body that there's not enough water to wash away the salt. Your kidneys can only process so much salt, and if there's too much of it, water is retained to deal with it. But the thing is, it only works with fresh water. If you drink salt water, you'll feel even thirstier than before because the amount of sodium in it is much more than water can wash out. And yet, no fresh water doesn't mean no life at all. After all, marine animals, fish, and algae would still thrive in salt water, but there would be neither land animals nor land plants that take fresh water from underground sources. The whole process of evolution would have taken an entirely different route. Ancestors of today's land animals would probably stayed in the water and never set foot on dry land because they wouldn't have been able to drink. We would have never evolved into what we are today either. Most probably, sentient life would still have appeared, yet not on land but in water. The difficulty is in that the ancient primates had limbs that allowed them to use tools and make new ones, which led to more and more sophisticated inventions. Underwater, developing arms and hands would be unnecessary. Animals need fins and flippers to swim fast and catch prey or get away from predators. If they only had hind limbs suited for swimming, they'd be slower and lose to more agile species. Experiments show that dolphins, for example, have a very high level of intelligence, so they might have just occupied the top of the food chain instead of humans. Still, unable to use handmade equipment, their cognitive development would have stopped or at least slowed down significantly. Civilization would have appeared much later, if ever. And as crazy as it sounds, merfolk would likely have been the only ones to bring it about. Mer people would have had powerful tails with big fins, but their torsos wouldn't have looked like humans. More likely, they would have sleek bodies much like dolphins, allowing them to push through the water with ease. They would have also had arms and hands like humans to operate tools, but with membranes between fingers to be able to swim more efficiently. Finally, they would have probably had developed gills to be able to breathe underwater without having to go to the surface every once in a while like marine mammals do. Their cities would have looked like something from a sci-fi movie too. Physics works differently underwater and on the surface because water pressure and resistance are much higher than those of air. If you ever tried slamming home a nail with a hammer underwater, you certainly know what I'm talking about. So to be able to work with many of the tools we're used to, merfolk would have to be several times stronger than we are. They wouldn't be able to use fire either, obviously, so they'd probably develop a way to use hot springs to power their machines at a later stage of civilization. Underwater currents would help with that as well. Also, saltwater is a very good electric conductor, so merpeople would likely to be able to electrify their homes and cities without the need for copper wire. Or they could use bioluminescence instead. There are a lot of deep-dwelling creatures and plants that use this method to navigate in the abyss, so our alternative humans could use them to their advantage. Another option would be for merpeople to become cold-blooded. If that was the case, they would have a very slow metabolism, allowing them to live for hundreds of years, just like Greenland sharks. The lifespan of these creatures is about 400 years. They'd never be in a hurry not to waste energy, and they would definitely not be mammals then. Without the need for warmth, merfolk wouldn't waste time on heating their homes or warm clothing. Instead, they'd concentrate on other fields of science and industry, and their progress would likely be booming. In fact, if underwater humans evolved as cold-blooded animals, they would have every chance to become much more technologically advanced than we are today. That said, above the surface of the oceans, things would change drastically as well. With all water turned to the salty kind, the landmass would transform into a barren wasteland. No living thing would be able to survive without drinking water. So instead of lush greenery, all the continents would only have stone and sand deserts, or icy ones as in the case of Antarctica. The atmosphere could go both ways, either colder or warmer, depending on how the life on Earth behaved. No plants would mean much less oxygen produced, but the lack of animals, and especially humans with their air pollution, would also decrease the amounts of CO2. Underwater life also produces both these gases, so the temperature on the planet would depend on the amounts that ocean inhabitants generated. All in all, the face of our planet would be a very different one if all the water on it was salty. But thankfully, we have fresh water at our disposal, so we'll never know what it's like to be a mer-human.